Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Welcome to this episode of When Football Was Football here on the Sports History Network. I'm your host, Joe Ziemba. Since the Arizona Cardinals are the NFL's oldest team, with roots extending back to 1899, there are many examples of unusual plays, strange accomplishments, and perhaps odd statistics. Most of this stuff has been relegated to history and remains hidden on yellow newspapers or dusty microfilm. In other words, once the game or experience is over, we're likely never to hear about these occurrences again. As the months and years pass, the information sometimes becomes buried, if not simply forgotten. And many of these brief situations that were once in the spotlight soon completely fade and probably deserve that fate. For example, on this podcast, we have talked previously about the horrendous 1944 team called the Card Pits, when the Steelers and Cardinals combined forces, and that is being a very generous term, to finish the season winless with a 0-10 record. Part of the problem was the inability of the club to secure adequate consistency at the quarterback position. So enter emergency quarterback John Patrick McCarthy from St. Francis College in Pennsylvania. Due to injuries to others, McCarthy spent a few games as the starter for the Card Pits, and during his only full season in the NFL, McCarthy would complete just 20 of 67 passes, but also with a horrifying 13 interceptions. Unfortunately, McCarthy was unable to balance those passing miscues with offensive touchdowns, as he failed to complete a TD pass during the entire season. And here is where the strange part of the story comes in. Since 1944 was the only season that McCarthy spent in the NFL, his career stats showed that he completed just those 20 of 67 passes for 250 yards along with the 13 interceptions. The result? McCarthy finished his 1944 season and career with a very ugly 3.0 passer rating, and you can't get much worse than that. This is likely not very fair to Mr. McCarthy, since he was placed in a very difficult situation and never received the opportunity to demonstrate his skills behind an expert line. But unfortunately, the record is there, and about the only thing we could find in NFL history to compare, and this is over an entire career, was the performance of Atlanta's Kim McCorkin. In the Oscar category for the worst career quarterback rating for a guy throwing over 200 passes, the winner is McCorkin. During his 5-year NFL journey, McCorkin completed 108 of 272 passes, but managed just 4 TD passes versus 29 interceptions, bringing his career rating down to 17.9. However, since this program focuses on Chicago personalities, we'll still claim McCarthy of the Cardinals as experiencing the worst quarterback rating of all time, even if it was over a much shorter career span. Switching now to legendary receivers, one of my favorite Chicago stories involves Dick Plasman, who played for both the Bears and the Cardinals during his professional football career. You may have heard of Mr. Plasman before, since he is regarded as the very last player to appear in an NFL game without a helmet. During the 1930s, both of the Chicago teams played their home games at Wrigley Field, home of the Major League Chicago Cubs. Because of its dimensions, the only way to place a football field within the friendly baseball confines was to stretch it out from the first base dugout to the left field wall. Unfortunately, this cut off the full depth of the end zones, leaving precious little space from the goal line to the formidable brick wall, as Dick Plasman, then with the Bears, would soon discover. In the first quarter of a game against the Packers on November 6, 1938, Plasman was going full speed and looking skyward for quarterback Ray Buvitt's pass when he smashed violently into the Wrigley Field end zone wall. His injuries were quite severe, as the Chicago Tribune reported, stating, Dick Plasman suffered a broken left wrist and severe contusions about the left temple in the first period when he crashed into the grandstand wall while trying to spear a pass from Ray Buvitt. He was not wearing a headgear. In addition, it was reported that Plasman also fractured 3 ribs and fractured his arm. Plasman's football future was certainly in question, and his mother, after visiting the injured player, said, I'm afraid Dick will never play again. His broken arm has been reset, and luckily, he sustained only mild head injuries. However, I hardly see how his arm can ever be the same. But Dick Plasman did return to the NFL, winning All-Pro honors as a receiver in both 1940 and 1941, and winning NFL titles with the Bears in 40 and 41, and then with the Cardinals in 1947. Yet it was not until 1944 that Plasman finally surrendered and wore a helmet, which was now a requirement by the league. So here's an extra piece of Cardinals trivia for you. Dick Plasman started out as a player-coach with the Cardinals in 1947 and was an assistant from 47 through 49. During that span of time, the Cardinals sported an impressive 26-9-1 record, making Plasman, to this day, the most successful assistant coach in terms of winning percentage in the history of the Arizona Cardinals. Not bad for a guy who ran into a wall. Another key field general in Cardinals history was Pitchin' Paul Chrisman from the University of Missouri. Chrisman led the Cardinals to their last NFL title, back in 1947. But where did his nickname come from, Pitchin' Paul? Well, according to the 1946 Cardinals Press and Media Guide, it was attributed to his patience on the field. The guide said, Chrisman's coolness under fire is something out of this world. While at Missouri, he would chew a piece of lemon peel, pay no attention to a rather serious-minded opposing tackle who had visions of taking him apart, and nonchalantly pitch passes to teammates. He's still that way. Well, the best part of the Chrisman story is the habit of chewing lemon peels, one with which we generally avoid. While the Cardinals were still in Chicago, it seemed that a year would never go by without a rumor that the Cardinals were considering a move to another city. But here's one that I never heard before, and it involved a proposed move to nowhere. In his book, Stagg's University, author Robin Luster reported that at one time there was an interest by the University of Chicago in purchasing the Cardinals. Luster stated, Chicago law professor Walter J. Bloom recalled the time when Chicago's Southside professional team, the Cardinals, was undergoing some financial difficulties, and he was authorized in the late 1940s to inquire of the team's owners if they would be interested in selling to the university. The idea was that Stagg Field was now empty and that the purchase would be a prudent financial move. As we know now, this proposal never came to fruition, with the concern of the Cardinals players being one of the main objections, and this is certainly understandable. According to Lester, he said, some of the Cardinal players had gotten wind of the proposed deal, and they had revolted. They were concerned that their play at Stagg Field, which was the site of the first sustaining atomic reaction in 1942, would lead to their sterility. So here is one more rumor that was actually published as if it were a done deal. One of the more prevalent rumors in the 1940s was that the NFL was interested in expanding to the West Coast, and the Cardinals were considered a prime candidate to become that pioneering team in moving westward, especially with the rival All-America Football Conference expected to begin play later in 1946. On February 12, 1946, the San Francisco News confidently published its insider information on the Cardinals' apparent moving plans by saying, "The National League will bring a team to our town this year. It will be one of three already established concerns in the old loop, namely the Green Bay Packers, the Chicago Cardinals, or the Boston Yanks. Probably one of the latter two. The Cardinals probably are the logical groundsbreakers for the San Francisco territory, and they have enough players and promotional experience for a pioneering, claim-staking fight with the All-America Loop." Of course, that suggested move did not occur, and the two leagues eventually merged somewhat on December 9, 1949, with the National Football League admitting three of the AAFC teams, Baltimore, Cleveland, and San Francisco, and the Cardinals remained in Chicago. All of us are familiar with specialization in football today. This would cover everything from a long snapper to a third down pass rusher to a short yardage back. Yet at one time, football players were expected to go both ways, meaning they would play on both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. With archaic substitution rules in place in the early days of pro football, players were expected to be on the field at all times. But this didn't matter since players truly did not want to be taken out of a game. Or as the first owner of the Cardinals, Chris O'Brien, once said, "Everybody wanted to play 60 minutes. If you took a guy out because he had a broken finger, a fractured wrist, or a bleeding cut on his anatomy, you ran the risk of not having any conversation with that player. Just wouldn't talk to you." Cardinals coach Jimmy Councilman was one of the first to experiment with the concept of platooning players. During an exhibition game against the Newark, New Jersey Bombers on September 7, 1946, Councilman decided to use the exhibition status of the game to field 11 players on offense and another level 11 strictly on defense. Then he took his offensive lab work even a bit deeper by utilizing three quarterbacks, Paul Chrisman, Ray Maloff, and Jim Reynolds, during the contest, and each of the three field generals would work with his own separate backfield. Well, poor Newark never had a chance as the Cardinals rolled to a 42-0 halftime lead and coasted to an easy 48-6 victory. Needless to say, no one on the club complained about a lack of playing time after the game. Throughout the long history of the Cardinals, there have been many examples of the team's players becoming involved in on-field scuffles. Usually, if not always, these mini battles are with members of the opposing team. Therefore, it was not unexpected to have two members of the Cardinals removed from the game in 1932. The only problem was, in this instance, the two players from the Cardinals were guilty of fighting with each other. Here's how it happened. Although it was Ladies' Day for the Cardinals at Wrigley Field, which the Cards shared at the time with the Chicago Bears, only about 1,500 customers paid to see the game between the Cards and the Boston Braves. With such a low turnout, the host Cardinals did not even make enough money to meet Boston's guarantee of $4,000. To make matters worse, Boston scored the winning points on a safety, leading to a rather boring 8-6 win over the Cardinals. As such, the true highlight of the dreary battle was when the aforementioned intramural fight broke out between the two frustrated teammates. The Chicago American newspaper reported, "The crowd saw a couple of incipient fights, the last one between Captain Frank McNally of the Cardinals and Walter Kiesling, giant guard. That came just after the Cards had received a 15-yard penalty for roughness, and probably arose when the offender was bawled out by his teammates. Whatever the cause, Coach Jack Chivigny yanked McNally immediately and called Kiesling out of the game shortly thereafter to sit beside McNally on the bench until they cooled." So, no crowd, no money, no victory. Another difficult day at the office for the Chicago Cardinals. Hey, did you ever wonder who has scored the most points in one game in Cardinals history? Followers of this site and NFL history may recall that the great Ernie Nevers holds both the team and the NFL record for most points in one game with 40. Nevers accomplished that feat back in 1929 by scoring all of his team points, 6 touchdowns and 4 extra points, in a 40-6 rout of the rival Chicago Bears. In second place on our list is receiver Bob Shaw. In 1950, Shaw grabbed 5 touchdown passes for 30 points in a big win over Baltimore. Next in line would be the legendary John Paddy Driscoll, who tallied 27 points via 4 touchdowns and 3 extra points in a 1923 rout of Rochester. And fourth place on our list, the more modern player, is reliable kicker Jay Feely. In 2010, Feely had quite the day against Denver with a touchdown, 5 field goals, and 4 extra points for a total of 25. And then finally, during the Cardinals' final season in Chicago, Bobby Joe Conrad also picked up 25 points versus Washington when he scored 3 touchdowns and added 7 extra points. It is interesting to note that 4 of the top 5 individual tallies occurred while the Cardinals were still in Chicago, and the Nevers mark remains as the oldest individual record in the National Football League. Well, we just mentioned Paddy Driscoll, and here's an interesting story regarding his reputation as an outstanding player and drop kicker. Following a stellar tenure with the Chicago Cardinals from 1920 through 1925, Driscoll joined the Chicago Bears before the 1926 season and retired after the 1929 campaign. Then in 1930, the Bears picked up former Notre Dame fullback Joe Ziemba in time for a meeting with the Cardinals on November 27. Ziemba scored the only touchdown in the game, won by the Bears 6-0, but it was the missed extra point, a common ailment that plagued the Bears that season with the retirement of Driscoll. At halftime, the Bears players voiced their dismay over the lack of a kicking game and, realizing that Driscoll was in attendance at the game, decided to ask him to rejoin the Bears immediately and resume his role as a kicker for the club. Did Paddy suit up in time for the second half since he was already in the vicinity? Well, while Paddy was amused at the offer and was indeed in the stadium for the game, another commitment blocked his acceptance of that kind offer. Paddy Driscoll was one of the game officials. Finally, we always love sharing stories from or about Jimmy Councilman. In Chicago, Jimmy is best known as the last coach to lead the Cardinals to an NFL championship. That was in 1947. But before then, Jimmy was also a player, a head coach, and an owner of an NFL team. In the early 1920s, Councilman was a player-coach for an NFL team called the Milwaukee Badgers. He often told the story of playing an exhibition game down in the wilds of Texas around 1922. Councilman said, "My Milwaukee team played Clarendon College in Texas. There were a lot of cowboys on horseback on the sidelines. They had booze in them and started shooting off their pistols. Every time one of our guys was knocked out of bounds, the cowboys would scare him to death by riding their horses up as close as they could without stampeding on us. We were leading by a big score, and I said to our players, the Cowboys want them to score, so let them. So on the next play, the safety men, one of which was me, separated and gave the kids the whole center of the field. The quarterback threw a long pass and scored a touchdown. Yeah, that satisfied the Cowboys, and they left us alone for the rest of the game." And with that final story from the great past of the Cardinals, we'll leave you alone as well. Please join us next time on the Sports History Network as we bring you the 5 most unusual stories from the NFL's oldest rivalry, the Bears versus the Cardinals. Thank you.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history. But as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.